my name is Oscar Merry, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Fountain, and I'm going to give a short talk this evening on how we've been using SurrealDB to power some of the social features and the payments features in Fountain. Just to give a bit of background, I first came across SurrealDB maybe 2 years ago, something like that, and I thought the promise of the technology was really amazing. It kind of spoke to me as an engineer and somebody that wants to simplify things and focus on features that are user-facing as opposed to infrastructure. We didn't choose to use it at that time, but then back in summer of last year, we were going through a big redesign, and we felt that the time was right to actually look at SurrealDB again, and we ended up making the decision to use it in production to power the social features within the Fountain app. So I'm basically going to take you through a bit of that journey and talk about, my experience with using SurrealDB, and hopefully can convince you guys that it's a really amazing tool and that it is ready for production use. I'll give you a quick intro into Fountain. I'm going to talk about podcasting 2.0, which is a kind of broader movement that we're involved with. I'm going to talk about Fountain's infrastructure pre-SurrealDB, Fountain's infrastructure right now, and a bit about where we want to take it in terms of moving more components over to SurrealDB. I'll briefly go through some sample queries that we use as kind of like the headline social features within the app, and then just talk a little bit about where I see this all going and kind of what I would like from the SurrealDB team. And then I'm going to keep it quite short and leave a lot of room for questions. So please do ask questions, and looking forward to it. Thanks for coming. I do have a short video. We'll see if it plays.
Fountain is the podcast app that connects creators with a global community of fans and supporters. Discover, share, and support your favorite podcasts, powered by Bitcoin. With so many podcasts and so little time, how are you going to choose what to listen to next? On Fountain, you can share the best moments from podcasts using our powerful clip editing tool, and follow other listeners to start seeing their clips. Many of us would support the podcasts we listen to regularly if it was made easy. Now you can support podcasts directly as you listen on Fountain. Boost to send a payment with a message, or pay for every minute you spend listening. Simple, frictionless, and fun. Top up from Cash App or any Bitcoin Lightning wallet, or top up with your bank card. On Fountain, you can join in the conversation with other fans, share your thoughts, or like and reply to comments from other listeners. Unlike other apps, you get rewarded for building the community on Fountain. Get paid when other listeners like your clips, comments, or playlists, or just for being a regular listener. Listen live, offline, or in the car. Navigate chapters effortlessly and search accurate transcripts for every episode. All of this and more, packaged up in a slick and intuitive design. Download Fountain on iOS or Android today.
Cool. So it's a bit of a cheesy video, but I think it's important for two reasons. One, just to give you an overview of what Fountain is, but two, to kind of highlight how much we're actually doing within the app. We've got social features, we've got payments, we've got podcasts, we've got music, we've got live streams. And also at the same time, as a small company, we're only 2 engineers. We're also trying to compete against the traditional tech giants in the form of Spotify and Apple, and that requires not only matching them in terms of feature sets, but matching them in terms of design as well. So for me, as the CEO and the lead engineer as well, I say this because I want to get across to everybody that I don't want to be thinking about infrastructure and, things like that. I want to be thinking about the user-facing features. And that's what SurrealDB has really enabled us to do. And I'm hoping that as it develops, will enable me to do even more. To give a bit more background, so we're part of a broader movement called Podcasting 2.0. Now, a podcast is just audio content hosted on an RSS feed. It's very old technology, it's very simple, and it was invented almost 20 years ago. And actually, one of the guys that invented podcasting, his name is Adam Curry. He set up the Podcasting 2.0 movement about 2.5 years ago. And they set up this non-profit organization with two goals. The first is to preserve, protect, and extend the open, independent podcasting ecosystem. Essentially, what this means is making sure that open podcasting stays open and doesn't get swallowed up by the big tech giants. If you compare podcasting to YouTube, it's much more open. You can take your audience to different apps or hosting companies, whereas with YouTube, you're kind of stuck there. And so it's a really important movement. That's one part of it. And the other is to actually extend what it means to be a podcast by introducing new tags into the podcasting RSS spec. And this is what the Podcasting 2 community is doing. So we're adding new features, not just into the Fountain app, but also more broadly into the podcasting spec. Features like transcripts, chapters, live streams, music podcasts, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a second, payments, obviously, and cross-app comments. So it's just a note to say that what we're doing is much more broad than just Fountain. It also makes it much more complex because we have to deal with, for example, payments that didn't originate in the Fountain app, or, for example, transcripts that originated in the podcaster's RSS feed. And this theme of complexity is something that you'll see a lot through this talk, and that's kind of my goal in using SurrealDB, and my goal in trying to, ask the SurrealDB team to help me. We're also powered by the Bitcoin Lightning Network, which is the layer 2 Bitcoin protocol. Don't be intimidated by Bitcoin. It really is just a global money, and it enables us to do micropayments, which is really cool. So in Fountain, you can stream money every minute that you're listening to content, kind of like a pay-as-you-go method. And also, instead of likes, like we have on traditional social media, all of our likes are paid with money. And we think this creates better incentives for building a discovery signal that's based on value rather than attention. So yeah, that's an overview of Fountain. Now I'm going to get into a bit about our infrastructure, what it was, the setup before SurrealDB and after. And I've got some screenshots of the app here just to highlight what the infrastructure actually does for the users. So yeah, we've got the user database, we've got a social graph, we've got activity feeds, and we've got notifications. So here you can see the first screenshot is our home feed, which is basically an activity feed from all of the people that you follow. Up at the top, you can see clip stories. So if someone you follow has created a clip from a podcast, you can just jump in and listen to it. We've got profiles, and we've got notifications. And all of these are powered by a social graph. The second kind of category of infrastructure is our content. We have a main content database, a search index. We have transcript search as well, so that you can find the part of the episode you're looking for. And we also have a Nostr integration, which is another can of worms, which I'll get onto later. And then finally, we have payments. So we have a payments database. We actually have a ledger which we manage, which again is another incredibly complex and potentially dangerous thing to be doing. But it's one of the things that's critical to the app. We have payments analytics services as well for podcasters, so that they can see over time who's supporting them the most, which episodes are bringing in the most money, which individual users are kind of supporting them the most, so that they can thank them. And then finally, we have charts. And again, our charts are not attention-based, they're value-based. So the top of the charts are the episodes and the music tracks that people find most valuable. So yeah, TLDR is we have a lot of infrastructure that powers the app. And my goal is to try and simplify our setup so that we can focus on user-facing features. This is what it kind of looked like before we moved to SurrealDB. So the core databases were using Firebase. So across the user database, content database, and payments database. There's also others here that aren't even on the slide. For our payments, we use a service called Zebedee, which I would recommend for anyone that wants to experiment with micropayments. They're a great platform to use. And then, the areas of the infrastructure that are relevant to this talk today are kind of the social graph, activity feeds, notifications, and content search. So prior to Fountain 1.0, which we launched in December, we used Neo4j to power our social graph, our activity feeds, and our notifications. So we had a Neo4j instance on their cloud platform, and that was what powered, the main screens in the app in terms of the home feed, the episode comments list, and the follower notifications and things like that. And then for search, we used MeiliSearch, which I'm sure everyone's probably heard of. Not only do we have podcast search, but we also have profile search, clip search, music search, and a bunch of other things as well. And we also have transcript search as well, which currently is only done locally on the device. And then we also have payment analytics and charts, which were, hosted on Firebase. So our goal with SurrealDB was to kind of get rid of some of these different services and merge them together, because ultimately spending time syncing these different services together and making sure that the state doesn't drift is something that we don't want to be doing. It's a waste of time. We want to be building the features that our users care about. So, after speaking to the team, I kind of felt that it was a good time to try SurrealDB out, and I'm very pleased with the result. And like I said, it's now powering Fountain in production. So this is our setup today. You can see that we've essentially removed two services and replaced them with one service. So we've removed Neo4j, we've removed MeiliSearch, and now we just have one database that kind of powers the queries across those four, sections of the app. And this is massive for me, for our team, because it's just one less thing to think about and one less hassle. And actually, many of the features that we have are better, because fundamentally SurrealDB is simpler to understand. And so, we've been really pleased with it, and I can kind of talk about each one and how we've actually implemented that. I think for me, this was only a first step though, and what I'm really excited about is kind of playing bingo with this slide and just knocking down many, many more with SurrealDB as my bowling ball. I think where we'd like to get to is something more like this, where we have not only the main social graph, but also our content search, transcript search, Nostr, which again I'll talk about in a second because it's a can of worms, our payment analytics and our charts, all powered by SurrealDB. And it definitely seems possible. It's just a case of actually managing that and making sure that the infrastructure that we currently have can support it. I think that the cloud platform that's on the roadmap is a really important part of that. But I think what I'm trying to highlight here is, if we can do this, if we can just replace the headache of stitching together multiple infrastructure providers with one provider, it just makes us so much more efficient as a team, and actually could be the difference between, getting the app to a state where we can actually succeed in what we want to do. So that's kind of an overview of where we'd like to get to. Just diving into some specifics. So this is the SurrealDB query that we use to power the feed, which is essentially give me recent activity from profiles that I follow. One thing I really like about SurrealDB is the simplicity of the query language. It's very intuitive, And the way it combines, graph queries with regular queries is something that you kind of can just understand after reading through the docs straight away. And that's also important for us as a team as we kind of onboard new engineers to the team. But you can see here, essentially what we're doing is we're saying, okay, I have a profile, which is in the profiles table. Find me all of the activity whereby that profile is following other profiles that either posted or liked the comment records, and then order by the timestamp descending and limit them. And it's a simple query, but the result is amazing for our users because we get this kind of activity graph that's one layer beyond their direct followers, and it works really well. And it's simple to understand as well when you look at this, which is, again, a really important part. The other thing I'll call out here as well is, I'm not even sure the name of them, but the functions capability in SurrealDB is really helpful because it allows us to, reuse portions of the query language to power different parts of the app. And that's also really helpful for us because we can do things in a more safe and structured way when we're, for example, providing the payment stats on all of these activities. So for example, if you were to load up an episode in Fountain, you would get a comment list which would be powered by another SurrealDB query, kind of similar to this. But when you load that comment list, you don't just want to see the payment stats for each comment. You also want to see the payment stats related to you. So what you can really easily do, you can see, I'm not sure if it's in here, but we have a SurrealDB function that aggregates the payment stats for all of the comments that were loaded from the previous query, but also checks each individual one to see if any of those payments came from the person requesting the comments. And that way we can show kind of not only the value of the payments for a specific comment, but also whether you've liked it or not. And that previously, what we had to do in order to do that was set up a different separate stats aggregation layer. And so it's just an example of how using these SurrealDB functions can kind of improve your productivity as a developer and make things easier for you and kind of provide the user experience that people are expecting from kind of a modern social app. This is another one which actually isn't live in the app right now. It's one that we're trying to optimize. This is basically more complicated because it's saying, give me recent activity from shows that I follow. And this is important for our onboarding because most people who join the app don't follow anyone. But what they do is follow podcasts. Because podcasts is an open specification, when people download Fountain and import their podcasts, which I hope you all will do at some point tonight, they can just import from Spotify, Apple Podcasts, OPML. And so straight away we get their show list. Now, obviously, the home feed would be a bit useless if we just showed an empty feed. But with this query, what we can do is say, OK, you're following these 20 shows or 30 shows. And we know that, and we've set up those follower relationships in the database. So why don't we go and find comment activity related to those shows and put it into your feed? And maybe find, this is one step further, but maybe we can find comments from profiles that kind of intersect with your show list. So we know that you probably have some adjacent interests. This one, we're still trying to optimize the query to get it down to where we need it. But I think it's just another example of how we can use the SurrealDB query language to, in a simple and intuitive way, power some quite complex social features. So yeah, that is kind of an overview of Fountain and how we're using SurrealDB. I thought I'd just go through kind of like an assessment of my experience with deploying it in production. I think I've talked quite a bit in terms of what's great about SurrealDB. Would definitely recommend it to anyone. I think looking forward, this is, I guess, more for the SurrealDB team in terms of what I would like to see. So the first is query optimization, and just, I guess we as a team just need to get better in how we are optimizing these queries. I think because it's new, there's still examples and documentation that need to be built up so that we can kind of take the queries that we have and make assessments on, are they structured in the right way, or are we doing something stupid in terms of our data architecture. And that's something that I think will just naturally come as more people use the tool. The second is cloud hosting, which obviously we're still managing the SurrealDB instance ourselves, which is something that I hope to not have to do in the future. I think everyone gets the benefit of that. The third is kind of data scale. So right now on Fountain, to give you a sense of like the amount of data we're dealing with, we have about 100,000 user profiles in the database. And then, I'd say probably 10 times the amount of follower relationships on top of that. And then we probably have 200,000 comments, another 100,000 payment activities. And then we have about 5,000 music tracks. And then the way that we're indexing episodes and shows is that we do it optimistically whenever we see any activity related to that episode or show. So the actual main podcast search in Fountain is not powered by SurrealDB yet. We just use the SurrealDB search for profiles, clips, music tracks, the kind of data sets that are smaller. The big thing we want to do, and by the way, we rely on Podcast Index to do our podcast search right now because that's something that they kind of provide. But the main podcast search is not great. If you're trying to find an episode, it's not that good. And the big thing holding us back from actually, indexing all of the episodes and podcasts out there is just the data size. So there's over 100 million podcast episodes out there, and it's just a big job. So if you're going to do that, you need to make sure that your infrastructure, your architecture, and your setup works well. And so I guess we're looking forward to the time when we can do that on top of SurrealDB. The other thing around podcast episodes is that the main metadata for the episodes, the title, the show notes, the publisher, can often not be that relevant for search. And, one of the things that luckily we do have and is getting cheaper every year is transcripts. So in the Fountain app, you can, if you're a premium user, you can have access to the transcript of any episode. We just process that for you on demand, and it takes about 20 seconds, and it's incredibly accurate. Another thing we would love to do is transcribe every single podcast episode and build a global search based off the transcript data so that people can actually find what they're looking for, not only at the show and episode level, but at the conversation level. Even 2 years ago, we would never even think of doing this because of the cost. But because the cost of AI-based transcription is dropping every year, it's looking more and more likely that a small team like us can actually do this. But the other side of it is, which search index infrastructure do we pick to actually do this? But I think what's cool about this is the prices are dropping, and the infrastructure providers are kind of popping up to allow us to do that. So that's something I'm really excited about. And then alongside search, the other thing that I'm looking forward to doing more with SurrealDB is real-time payment analytics. So again, if I just go back to our kind of current state of our infrastructure, we use Firebase for these payment analytics layers, I guess. So podcasters sign up on Fountain, and we create them a wallet so that they can receive payments, not just from Fountain, but from other podcasting 2.0 apps that support the payment spec. That's really important. It's an open payment network. And we provide the podcasters not only with a balance that they can withdraw or, do whatever they want with, but also, analytics on who's supporting them the most, which episodes, when people are dropping off within the individual episodes because they're sending payments every minute. So we provide quite complex payment analytics. And again, that's done in probably not the best way in Firebase. And we're excited to check out more of the SurrealDB live capabilities and also the time series aggregations to actually power that. And then finally, another thing that I'm just going to mention briefly is Nostr. So I don't know, has anyone heard of Nostr in this room? Okay, cool. So we've got like 3 in the room. So Nostr is basically a decentralized social media protocol. There's no token attached to it, so it's not one of those. It's purely just a protocol. And the way it works is it's just simple JSON blobs that you pass around from server to server, and they're signed cryptographically, and each user owns their identity with the private key that they hold. What's cool about this is going back to what I said earlier with the new user experience in Fountain. So you download Fountain, you're excited about the use case of, creating and sharing clips, finding out what other people are listening to, but you don't have any followers. And what do? You have to slowly, again, build up that follower graph. So what Nostr allows you to do is actually bring your follower graph into any of the apps that you sign up to. So this is really powerful, and I think we're going to see an explosion in Nostr-powered social apps, because it finally eliminates that onboarding hurdle that so many social apps face in terms of rebuilding the follower graph. There's lots of developments happening with Nostr, but the reason I'm mentioning it in this talk is because it adds to the kind of, I guess, cognitive load and actual, architecture load and development load that we have to think about when building these features. Because suddenly, although we get the benefit of users bringing their follower graph, we also have to figure out, okay, where are these followers? Where are these follower data coming from? Like, where do we find the profiles? This user doesn't have a Nostr account, but this user does. How do we manage that? And so it's incredibly exciting, and I think it's going to create a new wave of social apps over the next couple of years. But more and more companies and products integrate social graphs into their apps, they're going to need the technology to actually serve the queries on top of those social graphs. And that's where I think SurrealDB could really benefit people, because it has the graph database built in, but it doesn't. It's not intimidating like some other services kind of are. So just an open thought there. I would encourage people to kind of check all of that out. So that's basically it. I hope you found it interesting and wanted to just open it up to questions to kind of go over any of the points that I maybe brushed over. I know I've covered a lot. The summary is just that, for our team, switching to SurrealDB has reduced the cognitive load that we have, and that's precious. And we're hoping that we can continue to do that as the product and the platform matures. So thanks for listening. And please download Fountain and follow me.
I remember one of the biggest things you said was, especially as a technical founder, it's really freed you up for some time. So I wondered if you could speak a little bit more about that, and anyone raise any hands as well if you've got any questions.
Yeah, definitely. I think, time is the most precious asset in what we're doing, and it really comes down to every hour in the day, every 10-minute segment that you have to, do you choose to respond to a customer support email, or do you choose to, do the critical infrastructure job that you have to do? You're going to pick the infrastructure job, but what that means is that, responding to users or, thinking deeply about where your product is going, the direction it's going in, that stuff gets left behind. So yeah, time's the most precious asset, and the infrastructure management, and especially the state syncing. So before, when we had Neo4j and MeiliSearch, we had to build all of these additional services that would sync those different states and make sure that, if they went out of sync for whatever reason, we could kind of like recover them to, a previous point. And that all just takes a lot of time. And it also builds a lot of tech debt because, you might have built one of these services, a year ago or 18 months ago, and you've kind of forgotten about it. And so, yeah, that's the biggest thing, is it saves us time by not having additional steps in the kind of infrastructure deployment. And that's really precious. And yeah, the more that we can get of that, ultimately the more likely we are to be successful. So.
Thank you. Yes.
Right. Okay. So I have two questions, and I appreciate the second one might be too big to answer in this format, but here it goes. So I was surprised that you replaced MeiliSearch. It's a search engine. It's supposed to have top of the shelf, top of the class search functionality. How was your experience in replacing the search engine with a database? And the second, in terms of loading 100 million records into the database, what is the blocker exactly? What issues do you anticipate? Because as far as I'm concerned, Surreal should have master-to-master replication, and then you can, maybe create read replicas. What's the hurdles?
Yeah, great questions. So yeah, on the first one, in terms of replacing MeiliSearch, MeiliSearch has a lot more powerful search features than SurrealDB does right now. But we don't need all of that complexity, and we don't need those features. All we need is simple search that works for our users. And the overhead of having to manage the schema within MeiliSearch and then updating that when our schema changed in other places was just not worth it. An example would be the payment stats that we have. So if you search for a clip on Fountain, they're ranked by the payment volume that people have sent to those clips. And, we're a small team, we're a young company, and when it was about a year and a half ago that we migrated our payments infrastructure provider. And when we did that, we changed the schema of our payment stats. And so because we were using MeiliSearch to power our search, we also had to go through a migration of MeiliSearch. And these things may not sound complex on their own, but when you add them up, it just turns a migration of one part of the app and the infrastructure into multiple migrations, all that have the opportunity to go wrong. And so, yeah, I'm not sure if that answers your question, but for us, the benefit of reducing one provider is worth the kind of, maybe, smaller feature set that you have. But I honestly think that the search features within SurrealDB are great for what we need. They're powering the app today, other than the main podcast and episode search, and they work really well, and they're very reliable. So I think also, especially if you're just starting out and you're prototyping or you're building a new feature, if you want to build search into your product, you shouldn't have to necessarily go and find a dedicated service for that if you're just prototyping. So yeah, that was the thinking there. And then the second question around the data size. Essentially, the things that you were talking about in terms of read replicas and all of that, that's the kind of stuff that I don't want to think about, because I want to be speaking to users and thinking about the user-facing features. So it's for that exact reason. I don't want to have to sit there and make a plan around how we're going to do all of this. when, that could go wrong, or, that in most companies, that's a full-time job, managing that infrastructure. And we're a team of 2 on the engineering side. So, if we attempt to do that kind of thing, one of two things is going to happen. Or maybe there's a third one. It's like we get it right perfectly. We never have to deal with any issues. But I think everybody knows that doesn't always happen. So the 2 most likely things that will happen are, we have to spend a large amount of time managing it, or, something potentially goes wrong. And that's the kind of thing that we just want to avoid. And especially when you're dealing with such large data sets, 100 million episodes, but also each episode has an hour-long transcript, which is a massive amount of text. It means that, I don't even know how long that would take to index in search, for example. It's just something that with our current capacity, we don't really have the capacity to actually go through that engineering exercise of figuring all of that out, because we've got so much other stuff that we're working on.